Hello, my name is Patrick Roach, and I will be doing a biographical criticism of Emily Dickinson's poem, A Certain Slant of Light. So, firstly, we'll do a bit of background information on Dickinson. Emily Dickinson was a prolific poet from the 19th century. During her lifetime, she wrote roughly 1,800 poems, around 500 of which focused on the theme of death. She grew up in a New England Puritan town, which pushed Calvinist, Orthodox, and conservative values. And despite her modern popularity, none of her poems were published while she was alive. They were all published after she died. And on the right here, I just have a photo of Emily Dickinson. So I want to go over Emily Dickinson's death a bit because I'm doing a biographical criticism, and death is a major theme in her poems. So, in the last decade of Dickinson's life, many of those closest to her passed away. This included her father, mother, nephew, and a number of her close friends, such as Charles Wadsworth and Helen Hunt Jackson. The death of her nephew, Gibbs, was followed by several years of debilitating illness. She was bedridden during her last 7 months of life until her death on May 15th, 1886. At the top right, I have a photo of her refurbished bed that she was bedridden in, and below that, I have a photo of her house. So you can see that Dickinson's family was quite well off. And a quick note about the house is that this is a modern photo. So their house was actually redone and it's now a museum, but everything is as it was before it was redone, just freshened up essentially. So now I would like to go over my analysis of A Certain Slant of Light. So Dickinson's poems were seldomly assigned titles. So the first poem or the first line of most of her poems acted as the title, and that's the case in this poem. And I'll be going over how her poem, A Certain Slant of Light, relates to her life. The majority of the poem focuses on the mental struggles of life in the winter months. And although disputed, Dickinson may have been affected with seasonal affective disorder in the winter time. Her poetry output skyrocketed in the summer months and dropped dramatically in the winter time. She had a clear inclination towards summer and made many references to the season throughout her poems. References to wintertime, as in the case of A Certain Slant of Light, are closely associated with death. And I have a graph here showing her poetry output in the later summer months compared to the rest of the year. And essentially, in the later summer months, her poetry output was the rest of the seasons of the year combined. So, really insane output in the summer months. So continuing my analysis, immediately after mentioning wintertime in the poem, Dickinson inserts the word oppresses, which closely associates the season with uncomfortable verbiage and shines a light on the feelings she is experiencing. Later, she makes brief reference to internal difference, referencing the uncommon torment she experiences in the winter months that others seem unaffected by. And here I have a photo of her writing desk where she wrote many of her poems. In the third stanza, Dickinson describes an imperial affliction that is sent us of the air, again referencing the changing seasons. And it is mentioned that it departs. This it is another variation of references to winter in the poem. And the poem ultimately concludes by closely comparing winter to death, describing that once winter departs, it is akin to the look of death. So by winter leaving, the look of death is leaving, but they're still looking at Dickinson. And on the right here, I have a photo of Dickinson's nephew, Gibbs, whose death greatly affected her in her last few years of life. So now I'd like to go over the scholar's analysis. So Wu argues that the poem shows how the incalculable may be revealed through the calculable. She argues that the reference to a slant of light expresses something visible, yet lacking in an ability to understand comprehensively. She claims that the lack of understanding in the slant of light is what leads to suffering in the poem, again referring to the incalculable. She believes the poem follows Dickinson's journey in trying to understand this slant of light and the meanings found in it. Wu also points out the lack of the use of the word I in the poem. She believes that this is purposeful and contributes to the play between the calculable and the incalculable. And the photo here is just a photo I found online that I thought was a good visual representation of the poem. So you see a slant of light, and it's also wintertime in the woods. So, as for my response to Wu's analysis, I disagree that the lack of the use of the word I was purposefully done to reinforce ideas between the calculable and the incalculable. Although this may contribute to the idea, it is on par for Dickinson and many poets to lack the use of this pronoun. I do agree that a major theme in the poem is a conflict in attempting to understand the slant of light. This could also tie into the struggle of a poet trying to find the right words and specific wordings to express the meanings they desire. However, I think this is a larger theme in the first two stanzas of the poem, and Wu adds no analysis of the final two stanzas. And on the right here is just some poetry that Dickinson wrote. It's not this poem specifically, though. So, continuing my analysis of the scholar's analysis, because of this focus on the first two stanzas, Wu does not focus on the presence of winter in the poem, which shows up later. Winter and death are common in Dickinson's works, and she makes no mention of them, which I find quite odd. It seems odd to disregard these themes, as discussion of death would appear to fit neatly into a scholarly commentary on the calculable and the incalculable, and overall, Wu argues strongly for her case, but is too selective in her analysis, especially disregarding the themes of winter and death. And here I have a photo of Dickinson's house before it was redone and made into a museum, sort of an older photo. So you can see it was still a very nice house even back then. So here I have a link to my Kahoot, and these are my works cited pages. And to make these slides, I used Slides Go. So thank you, Slides Go. And thank you for listening. This was my biographical criticism of Emily Dickinson, and I went over how her poem, A Certain Slant of Light, relates to her own life. Thank you.